I'm Will from MBUK.
And I'm Rob Weaver, MBUK's Technical Editor-in-Chief.
And we're excited to debrief together about the best tech found in the downhill paddock at World Champs, and of course, talk about the racing.
World Champs is always special, and to have it here in the UK for the first time since 2007 was a real treat.
At World Champs, riders represent their country and get just one run down the track to be crowned world champion. There is no 5-person podium, just gold, silver and bronze for the top 3. And what a race it was.
Oh my gosh, it was amazing, wasn't it?
Yeah, edge of your seat stuff.
Absolutely. First, I think we have to talk about arguably the most successful bike of the weekend. It has to be the Atherton AM.200. You know the bike well, right?
Yeah, I went up to their facility to tour the factory and ride on G's personal bike.
Right, so really cool bike, really cool brand, quite small in comparison to the likes of Specialized Trek, etc., who they're competing against. But they managed to get first and second in the elite men's, which is really cool.
It's quite a feat.
Oh, it's incredible. The bike uses a 6-bar linkage designed by Dave Weigel, suspension guru. And they use a slightly different manufacturing technique to a lot of brands, don't they?
Additive manufactured titanium lugs with carbon tubes glued into place between them.
And how many frame sizes do they offer? It's a crazy number, right?
Wow, small, medium, large XL, 4?
It's not though, is it?
It's not.
It's not. It's 22 frame sizes, which is just mind-blowing.
Pretty much tailored to each rider at that point.
It's crazy. You know, and they're developed in the UK, built in the UK, and you know, you can go out there and ride the same bike essentially that was on the top of the podium at the weekend, which is really cool.
So one of the biggest pieces of news from this World Champs Downhill week was Mondraker finally taking the covers off their prototype. What was underneath?
Well, they've changed how the shock is mounted at the back end. So previously the lower shock mount was connected to the lower link. Now it's actually fixed to the rear triangle. So I think you and I have both spoken to Jake Ireland, who's the guy from Sprung Suspension, who's also Brooke McDonough's mechanic and the guy tasked with developing this new downhill bike. So according to him, this new design allows them to have a high anti-squat at sag, so the bike pedals really well, but as soon as you go deep into the travel, it drops off so you don't get the hassles you might get with pedal kickback, things like that. So there's no idler needed, there's no high pivot around, and there's also a few nice little tweaks that they can make to that bike thanks to a removable bottom bracket shell, which offers them, I think, around about 21 mil of adjustment in terms of reach, 10 mil in terms of chainstay length, which is something that we're not seeing elsewhere, or at least we know about anyway. And they also have a removable seat stay bridge, so they can alter how stiff that rear end feels depending on rider preference.
Smart stuff. So we finally know what's under that cover.
Should we start with the juniors?
Yep.
Okay, so junior women, top 3, all from New Zealand. Incredible.
Yep.
And then in the junior men's, we had Henry Kiefer, the first German world champion in downhill.
I don't think he could believe it when he was crowned the champ.
I know, it's incredible. And then all the drama we saw in the women's event.
Yeah, well, practice, the big news was Brits Tani Seagrave and Rach Atherton both managed to get injured. Rach injured herself in practice, dislocating her shoulder on the motorway, and then Tani had a big crash in quali as she crossed the line, injuring her arm.
Oh, it was savage, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Absolutely terrible. But importantly, they still lined up to race.
Yeah, well impressive. True grit there.
Yeah, incredible. But how did it pan out in the end?
So Tani Seagrave managed to nurse her bad arm home to 6th place, and Rachel Atherton finished 8th with her formerly dislocated shoulder.
Exactly, and one of the front runners, Camille Balanche, I think there was a lot of people expecting her to really fight for first place, and she was really close. But she just missed out by a couple of seconds to Valentina Holl, who just rode incredibly well, didn't she?
Yeah, she looked lit in practice, great quali run, and then, just produced under pressure in the final.
No massive surprise. She's been on form. She won the last World Cup, and she qualified first. So it was, kind of in the making, but it was amazing to see her follow through and retain that rainbow jersey.
Absolutely. And what about the men's, Rob?
Well, talk about drama. I mean, oh my Lord. So I think we saw Greg Williamson come down, and after that the weather really changed, and so the rain started at the bottom and made the bottom half of the track pretty bad. Angel Suarez came down, a Spanish rider, and set an incredible time, took over the hot seat, and it was a little while after that until we saw anyone best that time. But it was in fact our very own Charlie Hatton, Forrester Dean lad, just up the road, came in an incredible ride.
Put in a big margin.
Big margin, and considering how wet those woods were, how tough that section was, cleaned it, absolutely flying, set an amazing time, which I don't think the commentators thought, was going to stick. But then rider after rider after rider just couldn't beat him.
And then closest to beating him was his own teammate on Atherton bikes, Andy Kolb, who slotted into second after making a bit of a bobble in the woods.
Yeah, and then Bristol local, Laurie Greenland in third, which was amazing to see. He was looking amazing in practice, and I think a lot of people had him penciled in for the top slot. Couldn't quite make it happen, but still an incredible ride. I don't think he had the easiest of weeks, so it was great to see him right up there.
And then following Laurie was defending world champion and fastest qualifier Loic Bruni, who really wanted to win this one. So he's not a Fort William specialist, but I think he was still a little disappointed.
But it was great to see Troy Brosnan, the Australian, back on form, slotting into 5th place. He's won there before, back in 2014, so he knows the track, he knows the place really well. But great to see him back up there.
The track at Fort William is one of the roughest and fastest on the calendar, with a strange mix of surfaces including bike park shingle, boardwalks, PT mud, and of course millions of granite boulders. Were there any changes to the track before World Champs, Rob?
Yeah, so they worked on the track a lot ahead of this race, loads. In fact, they redirected some sections. There was a new section through the woods, I think, or at least a new lead into it. And from what I heard, some of the sections were actually faster than ever, where previously they'd been so rough. They'd smoothed some of them out, so it meant that riders were hitting the rough sections even faster, making bike setup even harder than before.
Custom paint jobs are always a massive part of the World Champs hype. Did you see any that caught your eye, Rob?
Oh, there were so many cool ones. I think first and foremost we need to mention Amy Kenyon. So she rides for Pink Bike Racing on a Santa Cruz V10, the older iteration of it. Her bike had a custom iron brew theme, which, I mean, for a Scottish rider, it couldn't be more appropriate, right? How
Scottish
cool was
rider
that?
at Scottish World Champs, yeah.
I know, it was so cool. But there were tons of others as well, right? Bernard Pivot, for example, was really nice.
So Bernard's just taken delivery of a new Ferrari. So I caught up with him at Hardline. He was rather excited about getting his bright yellow Testarossa and his graphics and the colour on his bike match his new car, so that was pretty cool.
And of course Canyon had a tartan theme running throughout their bikes, but were able to have their own sort of personal touch, so tweaking colours between the riders, which looked amazing and so cool for such an iconic race.
So prototypes like the Mondraker are made in very small volumes, but perhaps the smallest volume, most boutique bike was under Nico Mullally this weekend.
Yeah, so his Frameworks bike is it's his own personal project that he's set up. He's in charge of suspension kinematics, geometry. He's working with different frame builders on rear ends, front ends, linkages, all of this stuff. An incredible feat for a rider who also owns a bike park and runs races and stuff like that. It's insane. But yeah, it was great to see him back at the races because he's just come back from being injured. What's really cool about the bike he raced at the weekend is that it's the first bike he's used with a steel front triangle. And he made this steel front triangle in collaboration with Cy, who runs Cotic Bikes, Cy Turner. So using Cy's knowledge and then Five Lamb Bikes, who are based in Edinburgh, to build the front triangle, he's then got his Cascade links made by Cascade Components, mated to a carbon rear end. And then, yeah, he's got this incredible bike. It's fairly raw, but it obviously works. He's gone through so many different design iterations, geometries, had all these issues with the frames cracking over time, and it feels like he's in a really, really good place now. And he's obviously riding well too. But Nico Mullally's Frameworks bike wasn't the only boutique one-off frame at the race, was it?
No, we saw something pretty wild in the Gamux pit.
Yes. So do you want to tell us a bit more about that, Will?
Okay, so it actually had a gearbox and it was belt drive and it had a high pivot and it was a CNC machine frame. So all in all, one wild looking bike. And who was riding it, Rob?
Mike Hooter, a Swiss, I don't know if I'm saying his name right, but he's a Swiss junior. So I think there's only 2 guys on the team. And from what I can find out about it, they've changed the bike in the last couple of years. So information around is pretty limited, but they've changed the swing arm most recently, I think.
Yeah, we were looking at it on the internet this morning and there's definitely been some serious changes happened since the first prototype in 2021. So it's got this wild looking swing arm with like CNC machine cutouts and just like the one, what would you call it?
It's like a single arm, essentially, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, 2-sided single arm style, like a motocross bike.
Mm-hmm. So what are the possible advantages to running a gearbox and a belt instead of a chain and a mech like most of the other riders are running?
Right, well, removing the rear derailleur has a massive advantage in the sense that you can't actually smash it off because it's not there, right? And in a place like Fort William where there's so many big jagged boulders, it's really easy to do it. I'm sure you've done it. I've definitely done it. So yeah, if you don't have any kind of drive, then you can't pedal that bottom section, which is super important. You're also lowering the unsprung mass, so the bike, in theory, the suspension is going to be potentially more sensitive. Maintenance should be next to nothing. Don't need to oil a belt drive, and you shouldn't be able to snap one either. But Will, here's a question for you. Why are so few brands using gearboxes?
Well, they can be quite expensive, but I think the main problem in something like downhill is they can be quite draggy. So you want as much of the power made by your legs to get to the ground through the back wheel. And unfortunately, putting a gearbox in between, there's no way around it. It can create some mechanical drag.
It's a shame, but it'd be good to see more.
We'd love to see more. Manufacturers, take note. In addition to Greg Williamson, who sat on the hot seat for quite a long time at Fort William, another Madison Saracen rider was Matt Walker. His race didn't go so well, did it?
Poor guy had a massive crash. He was doing really well up until that point, and then, yeah, right towards the bottom, stacked it.
I always look at that bridge and I think it's just beckoning a front wheel, and unfortunately that's exactly what happened to Matt. However, we should talk about the bikes that those guys were riding this weekend.
Yes, they finally got paint on them for a start, which is really nice to see. Up until this point they've just been raw, which I think is pretty cool, but I guess special race like World Champs, they've jazzed them up a bit. So the new bikes, unlike the last, or the current bike I suppose, which is a single pivot with a link actuating the shock, are now 6 bar. So a bit more complicated, but I think the goal here was to get rid of that brake arm that they've been using to help isolate the braking forces on the suspension.
Which is non-standard.
Yeah, it's not a standard piece of equipment. So by switching to this new platform, they're able to ditch that and hopefully improve how the bike feels under braking.
And it looked really good. It looked really good under those riders this weekend. It was clearly working well.
It did. It's just a shame, yeah. The luck ran out for poor old Matt, and it sounds like, well, it looks like his custom painted helmet may have run out too. Oof. And well, what about the new V10 under the Syndicate team?
Well, it's the 8th iteration of the V10. So as you already mentioned, Amy Kenyon on that V10.7 and the rest of the Syndicate all on the V10.8, all with custom paint jobs. So those bikes were looking class.
Now we've talked about these new V10s in a previous video, but is there anything else we found out from the World Champs?
Well, we talked about it earlier. You spotted from the Behr frame there was something interesting going on with the headset.
Yeah, so it looks like there's going to be space to fit some kind of reach adjust headset within there, which I don't think we knew about previously, which is pretty cool. Another element of adjustment, which downhillers I'm sure will love. Well, I mean, Laurie had a great weekend, getting third, maybe not quite the top step that maybe he was predicted, but Greg Minnaar, I mean, it could have been his, 5th World Champs, 8th win at Fort William, but it didn't come to pass. So what happened?
In his interview, he was clearly alluding to the fact that he'd been working hard towards this specific race. But as you say, yeah, it wasn't to be because he hit a rut and his tyre just came off the rim completely. Both sides just wrapped around the frame.
But does he run an insert?
Well, there was no insert flapping around at the back of the bike. It just seemed like a normal tubeless tyre without an insert, which is very interesting because you'd think at a track like Fort William, that's one of the places you would want to run an insert to protect your tyres and rims from the rocks.
But I mean, you used to work for the Athertons, right? Do they use them?
This was back in the day, Rob. This was 2016, so there were some prototype inserts floating around. But we caught up with Ben Lovell, the Atherton's mechanic in Hardline. He said, taking all the inserts out of the workshop, no one runs inserts, and they finished first and second. So who knows?
Well, and clearly, you know, if I suppose if Laurie's on the same program as Greg, maybe he doesn't run inserts either, and he didn't have any issues.
Greg seemed to think it was unlucky. He just hit something at exactly the right angle to take the tyre off. He hadn't had the problems in practice.
But clearly the bike's still going well.
So there you have it, a gondola full of cool bikes, and the 2023 World Champs have all been crowned.
But there's still a whole heap to look forward to from the remainder of the World Cup downhill season.
Absolutely. Thanks to you, Rob, for talking to us, and if you enjoyed this video, please let us know in the comments after giving it a like, and subscribe to BikeRadar for more World Cup content.